Today we are in part 4 of this series. And before I jump in, one of the things that's true about our current climate, that's a good thing or a bad thing depending on kind of where you're at. It is easier to dig up dirt on somebody than at any point in human history. So if you've got somebody you need to dig up dirt on, that's the good news. You can do it from the comfort of your own home now. Google is your friend. You can go find an embarrassing blog from them in 2003 or a Facebook post from like 15 years ago. It's so easy. In fact, honestly, side note, there is nobody that I have less in common with or am more embarrassed by than me 15 years ago posting stuff on Facebook, like about, eating a Hot Pocket. I'm like, what was I doing with my life at that point? So that others of you, they wouldn't have to go further than a gamer tag for like PlayStation or Xbox that would embarrass you. Others of you, it's, an old TikTok, but it's just easier than ever. Like, even if it doesn't dig up dirt, it could just embarrass you. So it's just, I don't know if that's a good thing, but it's just true. And actually, last thing, if you've got kids, and if you don't, you should maybe rethink, going down that road. There is nothing more terrifying than kids with prayer requests in a small group at church. So just so you know, if you've got secrets, they will come out. Like, your kids will talk about them in the form of prayer requests. You think they're not listening, and then they are. I mean, the stories that come back to us are unbelievable. So just know that. Years ago, I can tell us because it was years ago, this kid was in a small group, and they were like, sharing prayer requests. And they were talking about their grandma was with them, living with them. And she's like, grandma's living with us, but my mom says she needs to go. And we didn't know what that meant. Like, should we elevate this to somebody like go, like move out? Or like, do you mean a different she needs to go? So we weren't sure. Anyway, your kids will expose you. So there's lots of ways that we can dig up dirt. Also, not only is it easier than ever to dig up dirt, it's easier than ever to get canceled for something. That's just the truth. And, a whole lifetime of good can be outweighed by, a bad decision. And it's just a part of it. But here's the thing about it. If we're honest, though, no matter kind of what your background is, we're not equal opportunity cancelers. I mean, nobody is. It's a little bit hypocritical. Let me just use one realm of culture and society. If you're into politics or whatever, this is what people that are, care about that do. They will always maximize the flaws of somebody else, which, you should call out evil and injustice and all of that. So I'm a big advocate for that. But they tend, you just see what you're looking for in other people. And so you maximize all of the flaws. They're off the rails. And then we always minimize it toward like whatever. Our group of people, the people we connect with, our size, and you're like, well, that was a long time ago. Everybody does that. It's not that big a deal. So we maximize it for other people. We minimize it for people that we think are on our side, which is kind of ridiculous. But then here's the other thing we do. And I don't even know you, but I know you do this. And then we justify our own dirt, right? And we're like, well, it's an exception, and that decision is not normally me. And we view it within the context of our whole lives, which honestly is more accurate. But we don't ever do this for anybody else. Like, we justify our things, our past, our stuff, our bad decisions, and we contextualize it. But we don't really do that for anybody else, but that's what others would want us to do, and that's what would want done toward us. So I'll come back to that in a second. We're in part 4 of this series called Your Integrity, Our World. And here's our definition of integrity in this series. Integrity is for you to do what you ought to, even if it costs you. And in fact, you actually don't know if you have integrity until you're faced with a decision where it actually is going to hurt you, and you've got to decide if you're going to do it, even though it won't initially benefit you. That's actually when you know whether you have integrity or not. And the thing about integrity is it is always personal, or it's always private, or personal, I should say, but it's never private in the sense that when our integrity fails, our integrity erodes, it always impacts other people. I mean, we've said this before, but when your integrity starts to fall apart, your irresponsibility always becomes somebody else's responsibility. And a lot of you relate with this because, whatever the scenario is, maybe it was a sibling and things were just out of control and they were irresponsible and they didn't have integrity. And all of a sudden you felt like you didn't get the attention you deserved in that family because, they were always in crisis and their irresponsibility was transferred to you. It affected you. Or maybe for some of you, you kind of have the really difficult time of being parented by parents, and I use the word parented lightly because there's just some irresponsibility and some stuff they haven't dealt with, and so now you feel like you're parenting your parents because their irresponsibility has become your responsibility. Our integrity is never localized. It's never in a vacuum. Our lack of integrity always impacts other people. In fact, this is what the writer of Proverbs says when he said this. This is our verse for the series. The integrity of the what? The integrity of the upright. And as we've said in this series, your life is all about your posture. His word picture is when you're upright, you're not, looking over and seeing and responding to what's right in front of you, what you want today, what's going to benefit you today, what seems attractive today, your appetites today. It's always about ultimate, not immediate. It's always about later, not about now, because there's things you want now that ultimately you're not going to want later. It's not going to make you the person that you want to be. You're not going to have the life that you want to live. And so it's all about weighing decisions in light of the future, which, I mean, honestly, in our culture, we kind of work from relationship to relationship, day to day, season to season. But the writer of Proverbs says, no, the upright are guided by their integrity. It informs and it directs all of their decisions. And it doesn't mean, as we said, they're perfect. I mean, everybody messes up. But when you mess up, rather than cover up, you try to clean up. You try to reconcile. You try to get it right. You try to be honest with yourself. So there's no dirt to find. It doesn't mean I don't have stuff in my background. It just means I already dealt with that. And nobody can hold that over me. But those who aren't willing to do that, kind of strong language, but he's like the crookedness of the treacherous, has the potential to destroy them, destroy a season of their life, destroy a childhood, maybe a relationship or a business or what you wanted in 5 years. So that's what we're talking about in this series. And last week, we looked at the narrative of Daniel, one of my favorite characters in the Old Testament. I want to tell kind of the second half of his story. But if you don't know the background, his story picks up where he's a part of Judea, Jerusalem, that whole area. And Nebuchadnezzar goes on an empire, conquering mission. And he conquers all of these different empires and nations, makes them vassal states. And Judea is one of them, and Daniel was a part of Judea. Nebuchadnezzar is crafty, he's smart, so he's like, well, when we overtake Judea, we're going to take all the top 30 under 30, all the tech entrepreneurs, high IQ, best of the best. I'm going to bring them into my empire, change their names, give them Babylonian citizenship, because Nebuchadnezzar wanted to be seen as this, conquering hero with an international city. So Daniel's one of the top 30 under 30. And he's brought over to Babylon. He's given a meal plan, 5-star accommodations in the palace. You can go back and listen to last week. And a sweet deal, a 3-year internship under Nebuchadnezzar, normally being, taken captive, not a good idea. In this case, it was like they hit the lottery because they don't have to go to battle. They don't have to work the salt mines. I mean, he gets the best of the best. And so Daniel's taken away to this faraway land. But he knows Nebuchadnezzar has an agenda, and his agenda is to prop up his false god Marduk, the god of the Babylonians, and Daniel's just not going for it. And so here's the key verse that we looked at last week in Daniel 1:8, that Daniel did what? Daniel resolved not to defile, or literally, Daniel resolved not to compromise himself with the royal food and wine. And I said last week, because I grew up Baptist, I figured the issue was just he couldn't drink wine, that was the big deal. It's not. The issue was that the food and wine, basically Daniel's prosperity and health and success, if he were to go along with these plans, it would be attributed to the Babylonian god Marduk. And Daniel wanted to make sure that he did not live a life that gave evidence to the fact that the god Marduk was any more than a figment of Babylonian imagination. So he decided, I'm not going to do it. It had nothing to do with the food and wine. It had everything to do with kind of their worship and their praise of the god Marduk. And this is so important. Daniel pre-decided, meaning before the emotion came, before the options were even presented, Daniel made up his mind ahead of time what he was going to do. And we said this last week. There's certain things in your life that if you don't decide ahead of time, I'm not going to do this, I'm not going to go down that road, I'm not going to compromise this, that you will get into situations and make decisions you wouldn't in 95% of the rest of your life, because the emotion will be so strong, the desire will be so strong, the just, I got to do it, the pressure, you'll have 1,000 voices in your ear. And so Daniel decides, before I ever get to that place, I'm going to decide ahead of time to do what is right, to not compromise before I know what the outcome is going to be. I'm going to decide what I'm going to do and what I'm not going to do, even before I know what the outcome is, which is integrity. It's doing what's right, even if you don't know whether it's going to work out or not. It's doing what's right, even if it might cost you. And Daniel made a decision that literally would become the catalyst for the rest of his life. And it's the reason that we're talking about him thousands of years later. So to go to where we left off last time, the greatest test in Daniel's life would come 55 years later. That first test, he was about 15, 17 years old. Fast forward, he's 70 years old. It's 55 years later. He has served at the highest level of government for over 5 decades. And finally a test comes where Babylon is overtaken by Persia. And this is just, you can study this historically. And then King Darius takes over as Daniel's new king and new boss. And he decides he's going to reorg the empire and put 120 governors in place on the org chart. And then 3 administrators. And then Daniel be one of the 3 administrators. In fact, Daniel would be made the top administrator because he had earned so much trust over 5 decades. So he would be second in command to King Darius. And so this is where the narrative picks up. Obviously, there's a bunch of people jealous at Daniel. Like, how'd you get this position? How are you second? You're not even from here. I mean, so there's so much jealousy. And here's where the writer of Daniel says in Daniel 6:3, now Daniel so distinguished himself, which is why he ended up as one of the 3. Among the administrators and the governors by his exceptional qualities that the king planned to set him over the entire kingdom. At this, the administrators and the governors tried to find grounds for charges against Daniel in his conduct of government affairs. Now, we started this last week, but just to stop for a second. He has been at the highest level of government for over 5 decades. I mean, if you were to put this in today's, culture, how long would it take if you're looking for dirt on somebody? 30 seconds? Daniel, 5 decades, they're like, there's got to be skeletons in the closet. And again, in ancient times, there were literally skeletons in their closet. They couldn't find anything. In fact, the next verse says that even though they looked, they were unable to do so. They could find, what is it? No corruption. They could find no corruption in him because he was trustworthy and not corrupt or negligent. We said last week, I don't know any of your background. You may not even believe in God yet, and I'm so glad you're here and trying to figure it out and asking questions. But despite your faith background, that's almost everybody. That's the bullseye on the target. That's who you want to be. That's what inspires you. And Daniel was that way at 70 because Daniel made up his mind at 17. And it set the trajectory for his life. In verse 5, finally these men said, we're never going to find any basis for charges. Like, the guy has nothing in his background, nothing against him. The only thing we're going to be able to find is Daniel's commitment to the law of his God. Basically, we've looked, and the only thing we can find about Daniel is he is so committed to God. That's it. He's got nothing else in his background. So if we're going to get him, if we're going to out him, we've got to figure out something as it relates to his devotion to God. And we said last week, what if that was said about us? Like, even when somebody goes digging, it's like the only thing we can find is they're really committed to Jesus. So they go after Daniel and they can't find anything. So verse 7, they basically whiteboard a solution. They all get together, like, how are we going to bring him down? And here's what they come up with. They go to King Darius and said, we've all agreed that the king should issue an edict and enforce the decree that anyone who prays to any god or human being during the next 30 days, except you, your majesty, because you're amazing and we just want to celebrate you, shall be thrown into the lion's den. Basically, because, they're smart and they've figured this out. Okay, how are we going to get Daniel? The only thing we can get Daniel on is his commitment to God. So we got to make some kind of law that's going to make it illegal with his God. And so they appeal to King Darius's ego. And they're like, we're going to create a 30 Days of Darius campaign. And it's going to be amazing. Everybody's going to worship him. We're going to have a big parade and shoot cannons or T-shirts out of cannons. And there's going to be a festival. And because, it's ancient times, we'll throw in some executions to celebrate. It's going to be a music festival. It's going to be an amazing time. But 30 Days of Darius, so we can just celebrate you, Darius, because you're amazing. Your contributions are amazing. And everybody has got to pause their religions during that time, knowing, because they watched Daniel for 5 decades, Daniel wasn't going to pause anything. Daniel wasn't going to stop praying to his God, Yahweh, the one true God that was known in the Old Testament, Old Covenant. He was predictable. He was faithful. He had done this for decades. So then these guys who were trying to get Daniel go to King Darius and say, okay, and one more thing, King Darius, your majesty. Issue the decree and put this in writing so that it can't be altered in accordance with the law of the Medes and the Persians, which cannot be repealed. We want it to be irreversible and we want it to be enforceable because you're so amazing and you deserve to be celebrated with a big parade for the next 30 days and give away a bunch of swag. It's going to be incredible. And so verse 9, so King Darius is totally getting played. He's like, you guys are amazing. I feel so special, so honored. But he has no idea what they're doing. So King Darius put the decree in writing. He's like, this is a great idea. Thank you for honoring me. Now, verse 10, when Daniel learned that the decree had been published, he went home to his upstairs room where the windows were opened and What would you do? What would I do? Like what would you do in those moments where, because we've all had these where if I do this, I think this is the right thing, but I think this could go badly. I think this could cost me. But what do you do when you know it's going to cost you? What do you do when you are certain that the right thing is not going to benefit you? Not like, this might not work out. If I do this, or if I tell the truth, the relationship's over, and then we got to figure it out. And I've got to unwind all this, and I got to figure out what to do and what this next season is going to look like. Or if I don't give in to the pressure, this deal's not going to get done. It's going to hurt me financially for the next 5 years. What do I do if I don't, if I don't cheat on this and I fail and this semester is, what if I say no and the dream that I've been praying about and hoping for, it's going to die? Maybe it's not going to work out. When you are faced, and these moments are so unbelievably clarifying, you're at a moment or crossroads where you are certain, if I do this, if I hang on to my integrity, if I don't do this, it will cost me. Like, what do you do? What would I do? And the thing is, your answer to that question depends on what is most important to you. Like what you do in those moments, and I've said this throughout this series, and this is true of me and true of you, a faith that hasn't been tested can't really be trusted. You don't know until you're there. It's so easy to judge other people. I can't believe they did that. I can't believe they gave into that. You don't know what you would do until you're in their circumstances and in their shoes, because it's easy to have integrity when it doesn't cost you. But what do you do when you're certain it's going to cost you? And it all depends on what is most important to you, because in those moments you discover. I said in week 1, this is a weird thing to say, but I hope you have at some point, if you haven't already, this crossroads where you feel the pressure of, am I going to do what's right? Where your integrity will cost you, because it is such a clarifying thing about where you're at in your life. What is most important to you? What and who are you most devoted to? And is your integrity disposable? Depending on the circumstances or the situation. Is it a means to an end? But when you get in that place where you do what you ought to, even though you know it's going to cost you, you walk away and you don't know what the outcome's going to be, but you have peace with you. You're good with you, and you have peace with God. And so verse 10, now when Daniel learned that the decree had been published, he went home to his upstairs room where the windows opened toward Jerusalem. And to go back to last week, and again, you can go back and listen or watch it, but Daniel doesn't try to hide it. Last week with the food and wine, he could have just fed the food to the dogs underneath the table and go like, well, I got a clear conscience. But he didn't, because he had integrity. Like, I have to be open about the fact I can't do this. In this situation, he could have just gone and hid. He could have prayed in another room, but Daniel doesn't. And it says 3 times a day, he got down on his knees, he prayed, giving thanks to God, just as he had done before, just as he had done for 5 decades. Because here's what Daniel was thinking. This is a long track record. This is like, I've been living in this direction. I've been living upright. I've been allowing my integrity to guide me, which is why I'm in the position I am for 5 decades. Why would I change now? I mean, this is what it came down to for Daniel. Who controls the future? Who controls outcomes? And Daniel's like, Nebuchadnezzar, who was the world leader and Babylon was more powerful than anybody else. Nebuchadnezzar thought that he controlled outcomes. He's dead. And Babylon is no more. And now Darius thinks that he can control his outcomes, and he's the most powerful man, and Persia is the most powerful nation in all of the world. He thinks he controls the outcomes of the future, and Daniel's like, we'll see. But it really comes down to, who do I believe controls the outcomes of my life? And I just want to ask you this question before I jump back into the narrative. Who do you believe determines the outcomes for you? In those moments where it might cost you, you're certain it's going to cost you. There's going to be a price in that relationship or with that deal or that thing that you're trying to go after, or that business deal or the thing with education and getting through this semester or getting accepted where you want to get accepted, whatever it is. You know it's going to cost you. Like, who do you think determines that? Not because you're in church. Everybody has a church answer. Like, well, it's God, and I believe God controls. I'm talking about when you actually are faced with the decision, because that'll tell you the answer to this question. When all of a sudden you feel like, because you don't know the future and your boss, and he's kind of crazy, and you feel like you got to take things into your own hands, or I'm not sure, and if everybody kind of, he bends the truth a little bit, or this thing over here, because you're so afraid of the outcome. You're so afraid of what could happen in those moments, despite what you say about God and all the Sunday school answers. When you're willing to bend for the sake of an outcome, it really determines what you believe about who controls those outcomes of your life. So for some of us, the answer is like, I know you wouldn't say this in church, but is it your boss? Because the way some of us, handle decisions, we would think our boss controls outcomes. Is it the market? Is it our luck? And it's just kind of luck, which puts some pressure on me if I got to make some things happen. Our work ethic? Is it your in-laws? Is it your parents? Daniel believed in terms of the decisions that he actually made that Yahweh determined all of the outcomes for his life. And his responsibility wasn't the outcome. Because the outcomes were not controlled by any king or any country or any circumstance. And in that moment, he would determine who and what he was most devoted to. And in those moments where you are certain it's going to cost you, pay attention. Because it will reveal something about you and about me that we can't discover any other way. It will determine and it will reveal who and what you are most devoted to. It'll determine how real your faith in God really is. And so there Daniel is, and he just keeps doing what he's doing. And all the guys that are trying to get him, they basically have spies with binoculars and SUVs trying to scout it out and get him. And they see him in the window and we got him, let's go out him to the king. And so all these guys who are trying to trap him go back to King Darius, verse 12, and they say to him, did you not publish a decree that during the 30 days, anyone who prays to any god or human being except you, your majesty, because you're amazing and we want to celebrate you, would be thrown into the lion's den? And King Darius is like, yeah, I made that. What's the point? They're like, well, we hate to tell you this. It really hurts us to tell you this. And we weren't looking, we weren't trying to trap Daniel. We were just driving by. In fact, we were dropping off like a 30 Days of Darius swag bag, and we just happened to be there. And we hate that it happened, but when we went by, Daniel, verse 13, who was one of the exiles from Judah, remember King Darius, he's not even from here, I don't know if you remember that, pays no attention to you, your majesty, or to the decree that you put in writing. He still prays 3 times a day, and we are so heartbroken to inform you, it's not to you. And we're so disappointed in Daniel. And yet as soon as Darius hears the news, because Daniel had built so much trust in his time with Darius, but also over 5 decades, like it was hard to trust somebody, and he trusted Daniel, he loved Daniel, so immediately Darius is like, I gotta find a loophole in this. He brings all of his lawyers in. There's gotta be a way around this, and Darius can't find any way around. And so verse 16, the king gave the order because he had no choice, and he was backed into a corner. And they brought Daniel and threw him into the lion's den, and just before they dropped him onto the rat-infested floor, the king said to Daniel, may your God, whom you serve, whom you serve continually. In essence, may the God that you're more devoted to than your own preservation, may that God rescue you. And a stone was brought and placed over the mouth of the den, and the king returned to the palace and spent the night without eating, without entertainment being brought to him. He couldn't sleep. He's sitting, looking up at the ceiling going, what a dumb idea. How did I give into this stupid 30 days of Darius? I had no idea it was a trap. Why did I do this? And at the first light of dawn, the king got up, he hurried to the lion's den, and when he came near the den, he called to Daniel, and he wouldn't even go near, has them kind of remove the rock that they were using as a door, and Darius knows the carnage, he knows what it looks like, he doesn't even want to get close, so he gets about 5 feet from the edge, and he's like, Daniel, hoping to hear something back, has your God, into verse 20, whom you serve continually, been able to rescue you from the lions? Now, real quick, pause. Here's where we make a massive mistake. Everybody wants to rush to the end of the story. And many of you, even if you didn't grow up in the church and you know enough just because it's so, it's just such a famous story, you maybe know the end of it. If you don't, I envy you. You're like, what happens next? That's a great place to be. But many of you know the end of the story. But to rush to the end of the story gives a massive disservice to the story. And we do it all the time in church, if I can just say this lovingly, where we completely sabotage the story and we make them children's storybook stories that are all about the ending. And that was never the point of the story. The point of the story was never, and then Goliath was overtaken. And then the walls of Jericho came down and then they won. That was never the point of the stories. In fact, if you rush to the end of this story, you miss the point of the story. And we do this with so many narratives in the scripture, and we completely lose sight of the weight that's being communicated. The point of this story was not what happens next. The point of this story was what had already happened. Because Daniel's primary concern was not the outcome of his decision. You know how I know that? Because if it was, Daniel would have made a different decision. He could have avoided all of this. I mean, he could have just prayed in a closet, just like last week. He could have fed the food to the dogs under the table. He could have done it incognito and still well, I'm being faithful to God, but I'm not going to be stupid. I'm not going to pray at my window like I always do. He could have figured a way around it. He could have manipulated the outcome. He didn't, because his primary concern was not the outcome of his decision. His primary concern, and this is next level, I'll just tell you that. His primary concern was his faithfulness to Yahweh. His primary concern. Here's the thing for Daniel this is so important about the story. Daniel's win for his life. And here's the thing. Everybody has a win, whether you know it or not. You've never maybe articulated, you never wrote it down. You're living and it's kind of there subconsciously, but you've never really nailed it down. But everybody makes decisions about some kind of win for their life. Daniel knew what the win for his life was. For Daniel, the win was obedience to God. It wasn't the outcome. For Daniel, the win was faithfulness to God. And then trusting God with all the outcomes. Now, just real quick, if I can just be honest for a second. I mean, I've been honest all the way up until now, but extra honest. Daniel had no guarantee. This is where we skip ahead because a lot of you know what happens next. And I can't wait for the crescendo of the story. Daniel doesn't know Daniel's end of the story. Daniel doesn't know what comes next. Daniel had no guarantee of the outcome. You have no guarantee of the outcome. And that's so important. If I can just this is the real honest part that I want to get to. If somebody told you somewhere along the way, whether it's a pastor or somebody does what I do or in some class or religious background or somebody else that you feel like represented God or Jesus told you, well, if you just whatever, you just, marry a Christian and do a Christian and be a Christian faithful, whatever, it's all going to work out and God's going to do the thing and God's going to heal and you just have enough faith and if you just pray the right prayer. Can I just tell you as lovingly as I can, somebody lied to you. Somebody lied to you because there is no guarantee. And that theology is the most popular theology right now, exploding all over the United States because it's so American. Well, if I just do enough and work hard enough and have enough faith and pray big enough and it's quid pro quo and then God's going to whatever and it's going to be happy and healthy and wealthy. God never promised that. And I get that it preaches and you can get book deals and everybody feels good for a while. But eventually the reality of life will bump up against that. And here's the tragedy of it and why I'm so kind of upfront about it is that you will walk away and you will think something's wrong with me or wrong with my faith, or maybe God doesn't exist because you're leaning into promises that God never made. That eventually sickness happens. Eventually somebody's going to die. Eventually it's not going to work out the way you want. Eventually you're going to be faced with an outcome where you are certain that doing the right thing is not going to work out the way you want. And you can pray and you can believe and you can have faith, but there is no guarantee of the outcome on the other side of that. So let me just ask you this question. What's your win? What's your win? But what is your win? That decision, your life, where you're going next. Because do you know what cannot be taken away from you? Do you know what cannot be undone, what nobody can take away from? Nobody can take away what you do. Now, there's some stuff in terms of negative stuff in our past we wish somebody could take away. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about when you live a life of integrity, I'm going to do what's right, even when it costs me. And when I don't, when I mess up, I'm not going to cover up. I'm going to clean up. I'm going to do what I can to get it right. I'm going to live free in that way. But the win from my life is I'm going to do what's right in following Jesus, and I'm going to trust him with all the outcomes. That is the only thing that cannot be taken away from you. But here's the reality, if I can just be real direct. Everything you gain through sacrificing your integrity can or will be taken away. It is always, listen for just a second, and then you can check out, almost done. It's a lose-lose. You will lose your integrity, and you will lose what you had hoped to gain by trading in your integrity for that thing, that relationship, that deal, that thing that ultimately you were after in this next season of your life. And somehow Daniel was able to come to the place to recognize, I've won before I've ever got to the outcome. I've won before I even knew what was going to happen next because my win was not contingent on the outcome of my life. Somehow Daniel was able to realize what we forget. You and I, we cannot control outcomes. We cannot control, listen, we're not even good at predicting outcomes. Like what's going to happen. This is what, one more honest thing real quick. Maybe we'll edit out the podcast. It drives me crazy when religious leaders get up and they're predicting the future and there's this verse and I got the thing and here's what God's going to do next. Are you kidding me? You can't predict the outcome of the future. And most of us are horrible about predicting what God's going to do next. And then we always find a verse out of context. We can't control outcomes. We can't predict outcomes. The only thing that you can control is you. And Daniel somehow was able to recognize that the win for his life was to trust God and then to submit and surrender all of the outcomes to God. So what's your win? What's the win in this next season? What's the win in terms of your life? What's going to lead and define your decisions? When I was a kid, I was probably about 10 years old. My dad has been a pastor for now 40 some years. And when I was about 10 years old, my dad was a pastor. And I don't know I'm not going to name denominations and stuff. That's not important. But certain denominations, you have like business meeting, church meetings. Anybody grow up with that? And maybe your experience was amazing. You're like, they were so much fun and everything. My experience was not. They were horrible. Part of it because I was 10 and I would attend them sometimes. I don't know why. Also horrible because like whoever was the loudest and got the mic last won. So it was just, they were just horrible. Anybody know what I'm talking about? Not really. Okay. Nobody went to church when they were young in this crowd. So, but there was one in particular. My dad was facing this thing where there was just some, and this is my perception, but it's just some angry religious people, like just angry, horrible, to the point, if I can just be real transparent, later on, as I got older, I realized I had some stuff I had to unwind from, like some stuff where there was almost a borderline anger towards certain like groups of religious people that I would just feel because of what I experienced as a kid. I just felt like you guys are so, anyway, And I remember him, he had, and he doesn't, I don't think he even knows how much this impacted my life, but he had several decisions he had to make that would cost him. And I remember through that season of people that I just felt like, you don't look anything like Jesus. And again, this is my perception. You are so angry. And if I wasn't a preacher's kid and had to come to church, I'd want nothing to do with it. And I watched him on several different decisions he had to make through that season do the right thing, even though I watched it cost him. And in fact, with my sister and I, he would kind of bring us into some of that stuff, like appropriately, where we'd kind of pray together on it. And it was incredible watching him in the face of like, I know I'm going to do this, and I'm certain that it'll cost me something. And then fast forward, and I'm only bringing this story up because somebody reminded me of it last week, the first year of our church when we started, and there was like maybe 30 people, and no money anytime you're starting anything. And we just had this vision of we were going to reach a different group of people. We were going to create a different kind of church. And there was people who didn't like that, of course, and it was a little unorthodox. And we had very few people to like give any money, and it's all the stuff that, makes stuff go. And I remember early on, somebody was angry, kind of this church person, and I am one, so I can say that. Like, I grew up in this thing, and they were like, if you don't whatever, then I'm leaving and taking my money and whatever. And I had part of our directional thinking, we had like 30 people. So it's like, you're just like, you're trying to get anybody you can. Just come, attend, bring your grandma, Nobody really gave money. I mean, the whole thing was fragile. And so it was a big deal. Like, we didn't know if this thing would survive. I wasn't getting a salary. It was just, it was really precarious. And I remember this directional team member, and I understand it, in all fairness, he's like, I think maybe we should just compromise a little bit. It's not that big a deal, whatever. We can't afford to lose anybody right now. We barely have anybody. And I just remember, and I think it was because of my dad and his example kind of anchored something in me. I remember, I felt like it was the first big decision for our church where I told this directional team member, I said, I get it, but if we compromise right now on this vision to create an alternative church as usual for all people or a different kind of church, if we compromise now, we'll always compromise. We will always give in. And so I told him, I don't know where this came from. I was like, listen, nobody is going to buy influence here if we're going to be faithful to this mission. And then, and there's been many other seasons that like I haven't done that, but it was because of the example that I saw before me. And there's no bow on the end of the story. He did leave, took all his money. It was incredibly difficult, but you know what? God was so faithful in the process. And we're all going to be faced with issues like that. And there's other points that I can point to in my life to go, I didn't do it that way, or I was too concerned about the outcome or what was coming next. But in those moments where you're willing to do what is right, regardless of what the outcome may be, that is the win, because that's how you want the world to be. That's who you want your daughter to marry. That's who you want to work for. That's who you want in your family when you decide, I'm going to do what I ought to, even when it costs me. So back to the story, King Darius asked Daniel, who's in the bottom of this lion's den, and he's wondering what happened. Has your God whom you serve continually been able to rescue you from the lions? And I'm making this part up, but I got to imagine Daniel pauses for like 15 seconds. I don't know if he did. That's what I would have done. Just like, I'm just going to make him wait. And finally, Daniel comes back. My God sent his angel and shut the mouths of the lions. They have not heard me because I was found innocent in his sight, nor have I done anything wrong before you, your majesty. Now, here's the question. This is what you're really wondering. Will God do that for you? Will God do this for me? I mean, this is the point. If I was really in tune, I would like start to go preacher voice, what is that word? Crescendo my voice, like really get into it, run around a little bit and go, this is the year that you shut the mouths of lions. Everybody goes crazy. Everybody claps, do the thing that totally. And I don't think you think I have it in me. I totally have it in me. I could do it right now. Not going to do it. But this is the moment. I thought this evening. I was like, man, if I was really in tune, that's what I would do right now. I'd just run around, go crazy, get everybody excited, pray, and then I would let you go, this is the year you shut the mouths of lions. I could do that. I'm not. Will God do this for you? I don't know. I don't know. Does it matter? Because if our integrity is simply a means to a happily ever after ending, it's not actually integrity. It's disposable. It is a means to an end to get ultimately what we want. And Jesus followers, and I'm talking to me because there's been so many areas, so many circumstances where it has been disposable for me. But if the outcomes of our lives are more important to us than following and doing the will of our Father, then you're not actually a follower. I'm just a user. And Judas was a user. Judas thought when Jesus comes, he's going to set up a kingdom. It's going to be a political kingdom. I'm going to get a seat in his cabinet. It's going to be amazing. I'm going to have wealth. I'm going to influence. He's going to take over Israel. We're going to be the guys. I'm going to be right next to Jesus. And then when Jesus came and he didn't set up the kingdom that Judas thought he was going to, everything changed and Judas switched sides. And Judas decided to trade his integrity for 30 pieces of silver. And in the end, he lost his integrity. And he lost the 30 pieces of silver. And he would have lost the 30 pieces of silver regardless of whether his life was cut short, because he would have spent it, misinvested it, and in the end, it would have been a lose-lose, because it is always a lose-lose. And so following Jesus, I'm telling you, this is the deep end of the pool. Following Jesus means you stop bargaining. Like, this is deep. People every once in a while are like, why don't you go more deep? I'm telling you, this is deep. This is as deep as it gets without using a Greek or Hebrew word. This is as deep as anybody is ever going to get. So if you're like, I just need deep. You show me a man or a woman or a teenager or a college student who lives like this, that is as deep as it could possibly get, regardless of how much theology you know. When you recognize that the outcomes of my life are not actually the most important things. And I'll just tell you, I get it. That is next level living. That is Daniel living. That is unusual, but this is what is at the heart of following Jesus. I'm not bargaining. It's not about outcomes, because it is what and who I am most devoted to. Jesus' disciples on the way to Jerusalem are like, Jesus, why are you going to Jerusalem? They're going to arrest you. They're going to kill you. You're not going to be able to win. And Jesus is like, I'm not going to be able to win. I'm playing a completely different ball game with a completely different scoreboard. You have no idea what my win even is. In fact, John recorded, this was Jesus' win. I've come down from heaven not to do my will or for my own whim, but to do the will of him who sent me. I'm going to win, just not in the way that you think. And it's going to change the world. It's going to change the generations, because my whole win and my whole goal is to obey God and trust God with all of the outcomes. And Jesus would say, follow me, and what you gain can never be taken away. So don't try to gain the world and trade your soul in the process. Don't try to gain the world and trade your integrity in the process, because you'll lose your integrity And you'll lose what you gained or hope to gain from the trade of that integrity. And you won't just lose your integrity. You will lose what is most valuable to you. You'll lose your peace. And you show me a man or a woman at the end of their life, regardless of what they've accomplished, who are at peace, and they will tell you, I won. It was somewhere along the way it was difficult. Somewhere it cost me along the way, but I won anyway. It's why every single morning, I'm not overstating this, I literally have it written in a journal. The same practice that I did this morning. I will pray this prayer because I realize just how big a deal this is. God, help me today not to do anything that's going to sabotage my peace. God, help me today not to do anything or make any decision, no matter how much I can justify it, that would undermine my peace. Because I've skipped one slide. Because I've told you before, nothing is worth the price of your peace. Nothing is worth trading the price of your peace. No relationship, no deal, no accomplishment, no future thing. And I'll just end with this. This is the amazing news, and especially if you're like me, all the achievers and get it done and accomplish something. There is nothing ultimately that can keep you from winning. There is nothing that ultimately can keep you from experiencing what Jesus characterized as life to the full when your win is in the right place, which is an unbelievable comfort to me that no matter what comes, no matter what circumstance, no matter what crazy person, no matter what thing that hits the fan that I wasn't expecting, if my win for my life is, Jesus, I'm going to follow you. I'm going to submit my will to my heavenly Father. Your will be done. Your kingdom come. I want to live in line with what you have, and I can't guarantee the outcome, but I'm going to place myself under your authority, your power, your grace, because I know that even if the outcome is not what I want, I'm not going to give up what matters most to me, and that no matter where you are or your family of origin or how bad you think things are, Jesus has placed the Spirit of God inside of you. And you can live this life in such a way where you get to the end, and with all the stuff that was out of control that you couldn't really, do anything about, you can say, I won. I lived extraordinary. I did what was right no matter what the outcome was, and I trusted my heavenly Father. And at the end of that life, you will have what everybody is after. Peace with you and peace with God. Having not traded what matters most to you, but you have to pre-decide. You have to make up your mind ahead of time. Would you guys stand with me? And let me just pray over you as you make this decision. Jesus, I thank you so much for what you're doing in this room and online. And I know for all of us, like this, there's so many things even in my own recollection where I go, I wish I would have done that different. I wish I wouldn't have messed that up. I wish I wouldn't have traded that in that season. So I just pray that you normalize in this moment that we all have those stories. That for some, it would just be from now on, from this moment, that we would not let the past define us. It would remind us, but it wouldn't define us anymore. And that you would give us the wisdom to know what to do, and then you would give us the courage to actually do it. And God, this is next level. And some of us, it's going to take a while to get there, but I pray we'd begin to take a step in that direction. But to live where we trust you with all the outcomes, where we stop bargaining, where our life really is defined by, hey, the win for me is I'm going to follow Jesus, and I'm going to trust Jesus, and I'm going to do what is right. And I'm going to trust him to take responsibility for all of the outcomes of the journey, knowing that he is good and he can be trusted. So God, just give us wisdom and give us your courage to do what we need to do. And we pray all of this in Jesus' name. Amen.